The concrete truck came around the bend at 6:42 on a Tuesday morning, taking up so much of Juniper Lake Road that I had to ease my silver pickup onto the gravel shoulder with Lake Westridge less than 20 feet from my passenger door. 2 survey vehicles followed it, then a white Ralston Urban Partners work truck, all moving down a private 1.7-mile road my family had owned for generations. I stepped out and watched the concrete truck stop beside a culvert my father had rebuilt after the flood of 1987. Something was wrong. A site supervisor walked toward me carrying a clipboard and said, "Sir, you need to clear the road. This is the construction access for Westridge Vista now." I looked at the orange survey flags along my shoulder, then at fresh utility markings beside the drainage ditch. "Who told you that?" He turned the clipboard toward me. Attached to his work order was a Westridge Crown Access authorization signed by the Homeowners Association president, Sloan Meredith Pritchard. "The association approved it," he said. "Not my association." 10 minutes later, Sloan arrived in a dark sport utility vehicle, stepped onto my gravel in a cream blazer and light trousers, and walked toward us with the calm confidence of somebody entering a meeting she expected to control. She had spent years managing commercial real estate before becoming president of Westridge Crown, an 86-home subdivision north of my property, so she knew how to make a business decision sound like settled law. "Everett, we have been through this," she said. "Westridge Crown has road rights here." I nodded. "Your 86 homeowners have access." Her smile tightened. "So does our developer now." "No, he does not." Sloan opened a leather folder and explained that Camden Ralston's planned 112-unit lake condo development was moving toward a $28 million closing, and Juniper Lake Road would provide its convenient gated entrance to the county highway. She said the association had used the road for decades. Its attorneys had reviewed the easement, and the board was simply extending existing community access to the new development. I let her finish without arguing. That bothered her more than an argument would have. I had spent most of my career as a right-of-way analyst for the county transportation department, and I had learned that property disputes are rarely settled by whoever sounds most certain beside the road. The paper usually matters more. I photographed Sloan's authorization, the work order, the survey flags, and the vehicles, then asked the supervisor not to perform more work until the access question was settled. He was reasonable, told his drivers to turn around, and I thanked him because those workers were not the people I had a dispute with. Then I looked at Sloan. "Did your title company see the recorded exhibit?" For half a second, her expression changed. "They have seen everything they need." Good. That afternoon, I sent a certified written objection to Westridge Crown, Ralston Urban Partners, and their attorney stating 3 simple facts. I had granted no construction access, no expansion to an adjacent parcel, and no transferable road rights for the condo project. Sloan answered before dinner with 1 sentence. "Our easement is perpetual." I read it twice, walked into my study, and pulled down the old property file my father, Vernon Holloway, had kept for decades. Perpetual is not the same thing as unlimited. That was the moment I realized this was bigger than one truck on my road. If somebody showed up tomorrow with official-looking paperwork claiming a right over property your family had owned for generations, would you argue with them at the gate, or would you make them prove every word on paper? I already knew which one I was going to do. Let me back up. My name is Everett Wade Holloway. I am 59 years old, widowed, and I own Holloway Point, 63 acres running along Lake Westridge. The farmhouse matters to me, and the shoreline is beautiful, but Juniper Lake Road carries more family history than either one. Dad rebuilt much of it after the 1987 flood, setting culverts and hauling gravel until our land had dependable access again. Years later, my wife Hannah and I would drive that same road at sunset, park at the overlook, drink coffee, and watch the light move across the lake. After Hannah died, I kept making that drive. Some habits are worth keeping. Back in 1991, Dad granted Westridge Crown a recorded easement so families in the subdivision could reach their homes, and he never objected to them using it because that was exactly what the document was meant to provide. But Dad taught me something I later spent a career seeing in real property records. Permission to cross land is not the same as ownership, and a right created for a specific purpose does not automatically grow because somebody finds a more profitable use for it. A few weeks before that concrete truck arrived, Sloan had come to my house carrying glossy plans for Westridge Vista, and talking about 112 luxury condos on 42 acres behind her subdivision. The project had a problem. It needed practical access to the county highway, and Juniper Lake Road was the cheapest answer. Sloan said the association already had the rights. I told her to read the whole easement. Days later, traffic counters appeared beside my road. Utility paint showed up along the shoulder, and survey stakes began running through the grass toward Camden Ralston's parcel. Sloan had stopped asking. She had started acting. Juniper Lake Road had never been important because it was fancy. It was important because my father had rebuilt it with his own money and his own judgment after the flood of 1987 washed out 2 culverts and cut Holloway Point off from the county road for nearly 4 days. I was 20 years old then, home between jobs, and I spent that week beside Vernon Holloway measuring drainage, hauling stone, and learning why water always wins when somebody gets careless with land. Dad remembered everything. He kept receipts for gravel, county correspondence, survey notes, maintenance invoices, and every recorded paper connected to those 63 acres in a steel file cabinet that survived 3 refrigerators and 2 kitchen remodels. He was not suspicious by nature, but he believed property owners should know exactly where their responsibilities ended and somebody else's began. A handshake is good, he used to tell me, but write down what the handshake means. That stayed with me. Years later, when I took a job with the county transportation department, I learned that Dad's simple rule was not far from how right-of-way work actually operated. Roads could look public and still be private. Neighbors could have legal access across land they did not own, and 2 people could use the same strip of ground while holding very different rights to it. The important part was rarely the pavement or gravel you could see. It was the paper underneath it. Hannah understood that side of me better than anyone. She used to tease me because I could drive past a drainage ditch and start wondering who maintained the culvert, but she also knew Juniper Road meant more to me than a line on a survey. On summer evenings, we would take my pickup down to the overlook with 2 cups of coffee, park facing west, and sit there until the last orange light disappeared behind Lake Westridge. We never needed much. After Hannah passed, I kept the routine, although for a long time I still caught myself reaching toward the passenger side cup holder as if her coffee ought to be there. I did not turn Holloway Point into a shrine, and I did not stop living my life. But there are places that carry the shape of somebody after they are gone. Juniper Road was one of mine. That was why I remembered the afternoon in 1991 when Dad granted Westridge Crown its easement. The subdivision was smaller then, and several families needed reliable access from their lots to the county highway. So Vernon agreed to let them cross Juniper Road rather than force everyone into a costly road fight. He considered it the decent thing to do. But he was careful. The recorded easement identified the subdivision lots it served, described the road corridor, allowed normal ingress and egress, and included access needed for emergency services and utility maintenance. Dad made sure the document served those homes without quietly giving away the road itself. They need a way home, he told me after signing it. Give them that. Then he tapped the folder with one finger. But do not confuse what people need today with what somebody might want 20 years from now. 35 years later, I could still hear him saying it. Westridge Crown grew into 86 homes, and for decades the arrangement worked exactly as intended. People drove to work, school buses came through where permitted, utility crews maintained their equipment, ambulances could reach the neighborhood, and nobody treated the road like a battlefield. I waved at residents. They waved back, and most probably never thought about who owned the gravel beneath their tires. That was fine with me. Then Sloan arrived with a commercial development behind them. Her proposal changed the scale completely, because 112 condos meant future residents, visitors, delivery vehicles, service traffic, construction equipment, and years of activity moving over a narrow private road built for a very different purpose. She called that an extension of community access. I called it something worth reading before anybody signed. A few mornings after our first conversation, I drove down Juniper Road and noticed a small black traffic counter strapped across the gravel near the northern bend. Farther along, bright utility markings had appeared beside the shoulder, and 2 men in work clothes were measuring near one of Dad's old drainage culverts. I pulled over and asked what project they were working on. One of them checked his tablet and said, Westridge Vista Access Study. I asked who authorized it. Westridge Crown, he said. I thanked him, took photographs, and drove another half-mile toward the lake. That was where I saw the survey stakes. They did not turn toward the existing 86 homes, and they did not stop inside the old subdivision boundary. They continued through the grass, toward Camden Ralston's 42-acre parcel. Straight toward it. I stood beside my truck for a minute, looking from those orange flags to the road my father had rebuilt and my wife had loved, and the whole situation became much clearer. Sloan was no longer trying to convince me that the old easement could support her new deal. She had already started behaving as if it did. There is a useful lesson in that difference, especially if you own land with a shared driveway, private road, utility corridor, or easement across it. What people have done for years can matter, but so can the exact words that created the right in the first place. I had spent a career learning not to guess when a recorded document could answer the question. So I went home, opened Vernon's steel file cabinet, and started looking for 1991. The 1991 folder was exactly where Dad had left it, wedged between old tax records and a stack of drainage maps with his neat handwriting across the corners. I carried it to the kitchen table, opened the worn manila cover, and found the recorded easement behind a county stamp that had faded but was still easy to read. I did not need long to see that Sloan had been using one part of that document while ignoring the parts that made her argument much harder. That got my attention. Before I could dig deeper, an email arrived announcing a special Westridge Crown Town Hall for Thursday evening, and the subject line called it a community presentation on the Westridge Vista Partnership. I was not a member of the Homeowners Association, but several residents I had known for years asked me to attend because Juniper Lake Road was listed on the agenda. I went because I wanted to hear exactly what Sloan was telling people when she thought the deal was already moving forward. I took the folder with me. The clubhouse was nearly full when I arrived, with folding chairs facing a large screen and coffee set out beside trays of cookies near the back wall. Sloan stood at the front in her cream blazer beside Camden Brooks Ralston, a polished developer in his early 50s who looked comfortable, letting her do most of the talking. Behind them was a glossy picture of glass balconies overlooking Lake Westridge, landscaped walking paths, a fitness pavilion, and a small retail cafe. It looked expensive. Sloan began with property values, then moved to new amenities, stronger community finances, and what she called a rare chance to improve Westridge Crown without placing the cost on existing homeowners. The room became noticeably more interested when she announced that Ralston Urban Partners would provide the association with a $1.6 million access contribution when the transaction closed. She said part of that money could reduce future dues and part could modernize the aging clubhouse. People started nodding. Then the next slide appeared, showing the planned entrance for 112 condos feeding directly onto Juniper Lake Road under the words primary gated access. I raised my hand and waited until Sloan acknowledged me. Has Mr. Ralston been told that the existing easement serves the Westridge Crown lots? I asked. Sloan gave me the patient smile people use when they want a room to believe a question has already been settled. Everett, the association has enjoyed continuous access over Juniper Lake Road for more than 30 years, and those rights extend to successors. I kept my voice even. Successors to what? The room got quieter. Sloan said the association attorney had reviewed the easement and confirmed rights of ingress and egress over the road. Then she reminded everyone that 86 families had been using it without interruption for decades. That statement was true, which was exactly why it sounded convincing. But it did not answer my question. I held up the folder and said, nobody is challenging the rights of the 86 homeowners who live here, and I have no intention of doing that. I am asking where this document gives a separate 42-acre parcel outside the described subdivision the same rights. Camden shifted in his chair and glanced toward Sloan. She did not. Instead, she said I was taking an old document too literally, and that modern communities had to adapt when surrounding property was developed. I had heard versions of that argument many times during my county career. Recorded property rights are not usually changed by a PowerPoint presentation. A man named Harold Mercer, who had lived in Westridge Crown for almost 20 years, asked whether the $1.6 million contribution depended on Juniper Road being approved for the condo project. Sloan answered that the access issue had already been reviewed, and there was no reason residents should worry about losing the contribution. That changed the mood in the room because now my objection was not just about a road. It sounded like I was standing between 86 families, and a large amount of money. That was clever. After the meeting, two residents stopped me near the door and politely asked why I was making such a big deal about traffic using a road people already drove every day. I explained that permission for 86 named lots was one thing, while adding 112 condos, construction vehicles, deliveries, visitors, and commercial service traffic from another parcel was something else entirely. One of them frowned and said, "Sloan told us it was all the same easement." I nodded toward the clubhouse, then asked to see the whole easement. 2 mornings later, I drove toward town and saw a new billboard beside the county highway with a rendering of Westridge Vista glowing in the afternoon sun. Across the bottom, in letters large enough to read from my truck, was a feature they were already using to attract buyers: private gated lake road access. I pulled over safely, took a photograph, and sat there looking at it for several seconds. They were marketing something I had never granted, and now there was money attached to the promise. The billboard changed the way I looked at every vehicle that appeared on Juniper Road after that, because the project was no longer being discussed as a future idea. 3 days later, I found a utility marking crew near the North Bend, and the foreman showed me a work order from Ralston Urban Partners with a Westridge Crown Access authorization attached to it. Sloan had signed the authorization herself. That made it real. I asked the crew to stop until the access issue was settled, and they did without arguing. But the next morning, a geotechnical truck rolled in to test soil near the shoulder. I photographed the truck, noted the time, and sent a certified written objection to Sloan, the association attorney, and Ralston Urban Partners, stating that I had not approved construction access or any expansion of the existing easement to the condo parcel. By then, I had learned not to rely on phone calls. Put it in writing. 2 days later, the association attorney answered with a formal letter that quoted the old easement language allowing ingress and egress over Juniper Lake Road. The letter sounded impressive until I noticed what it did not include: the full legal description, the pages identifying which properties the easement served, or the language connected to land outside the original subdivision. I read it twice at my kitchen table with Dad's folder beside me. Missing words matter. Sloan treated the attorney letter like a victory and sent residents an email saying the association's long-standing road rights had been reviewed by council. Harold Mercer called me that evening and sounded uncomfortable because several homeowners now believed I was threatening to close Juniper Road unless the association abandoned the condo agreement. I told him exactly what I had said from the beginning. The 86 existing homes were not losing their lawful access because of me. That rumor bothered me. Then why is Sloan saying the road issue is resolved? Harold asked, and I told him I wished I knew. The answer came faster than I expected. At 6:42 the following Tuesday morning, the concrete truck from the beginning of this story came around the bend, followed by survey vehicles and the Ralston work truck, and for the first time the paper dispute became something I could feel under my tires. Juniper Road was narrow there, with the lake on one side and a shallow drainage ditch on the other, so I eased onto the shoulder and waited while the truck stopped. Gravel shifted beneath my tires. That was enough. After Sloan arrived and insisted the developer had access, I asked the supervisor to turn his vehicles around until the legal question was settled, and thankfully he agreed. I could have dragged a gate across the road that afternoon, but that would have blocked people like Harold who had a legitimate easement and had done nothing wrong. I was not going to misuse my ownership just because Sloan was misusing her authority. Rights work both ways. Later that day, I walked the shoulder with my phone and documented fresh tire marks, disturbed gravel, damaged vegetation, survey flags, and every utility marking I could find. Near one culvert Dad had installed, I found a bright stake marked for a proposed widening area, which told me the developer was planning for more than a few survey visits. This road had been designed to serve a limited rural route, not a major construction entrance for 112 new condos. Scale mattered. That evening, an older resident named Marjorie Bell stopped at my farmhouse on her way home and asked if she could speak with me for a minute. She had lived in Westridge Crown for 26 years, and she looked genuinely embarrassed when she told me the board had assured residents that Juniper Road was fully approved for the condo project. They said you were just challenging paperwork, she told me. I showed her my certified objection, but not Dad's entire file, because I did not want neighbors dragged into a legal fight they had not created. I am not trying to take your road access away, I said. I am trying to keep somebody from selling access they may not have. Marjorie looked toward Juniper Road through my front window. They already voted on the clubhouse work. I turned back to her. What clubhouse work? She explained that the board had approved planning for renovations based on the $1.6 million developer contribution Sloan had announced at the town hall. That money was apparently being treated inside the neighborhood like something already on its way. It was not. After Marjorie left, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote 3 columns on a legal pad. Road rights, developer promises, and money. For the first time, I stopped thinking about the dispute as Sloan trying to push extra traffic across my property and started thinking about the larger transaction behind it. If buyers were being shown private road access, if residents were budgeting around an access payment, and if a lender was financing 112 condos, then somebody somewhere had probably been told that permanent legal access was secure. That was the pressure point. I called Julia and Merrick the next morning, a property attorney I knew by reputation from my county years, and explained the situation without adding drama. She listened until I finished, then asked whether I wanted her to send a threatening letter. No, I said. I want somebody to read with me. There was a short pause on the line. Do you have the original recorded easement? I looked across the kitchen at Vernon Holloway's old folder. I know exactly where it is. Julia and Merrick met me at the county records office just after 9 the next morning, carrying a slim leather case and none of the courtroom drama people expect from television lawyers. She was in her mid-50s, had spent most of her career handling land and access disputes, and understood immediately why I cared more about the recorded instrument than Sloan's emails or speeches. I brought Dad's folder, but Julia wanted the county copy first because that was the version everyone else would have to deal with. Good lawyers verify. The clerk pulled the 1991 recording, its attached legal description, and the original exhibit showing Westridge Crown Phase 1 and Phase 2 beside Holloway Point. Julia and I sat at a long table under fluorescent lights and worked through the pages slowly, line by line, without trying to make the document say what we wanted. The first thing we confirmed was something I had never disputed. Westridge Crown really did have an easement over Juniper Lake Road. That part was real. The grant allowed ingress and egress for lots 1 through 86 in the 2 recorded phases, along with access needed for emergency services and utility maintenance. In plain English, those families had a legal path across my property to reach their homes, and owning the road did not give me the right to pretend otherwise. Julia tapped the lot numbers with her pen. This is why you were right not to block the road. I nodded. They have rights too. She smiled. Exactly. Then we reached the language Sloan had never shown on a town hall slide. The clause said the easement could not be expanded to serve additional parcels acquired or developed outside the described subdivision boundaries without written consent from the owner of the land burdened by the easement. That owner was now me. There was more. Julia asked the clerk to search for later amendments, road dedications, supplemental easements, boundary changes, and anything else that might have altered the original agreement after 1991. We found no recorded amendment giving the Ralston parcel access, no document turning Juniper Lake Road into a public road, and no written consent bearing my signature. Nothing connected those 112 proposed condos to Dad's grant. Julia leaned back and folded her hands. The Homeowners Association has an easement, she said. They just do not have the easement they sold. There it was. I had spent enough years in right-of-way work to know one missing document could change a conclusion, so I asked her not to move until we had checked everything again. We compared parcel numbers, subdivision plats, the 42-acre Ralston tract, Dad's deed, my current title, and the road corridor itself. The results stayed the same. The condo parcel sat outside the described subdivision. That afternoon, Julia prepared formal notices for Westridge Crown, Ralston Urban Partners, the project lender, and the title company handling the transaction. She kept the language narrow and factual. Everett Holloway disputed any claimed right to extend Juniper Lake Road access to the Ralston parcel. The recorded easement appeared limited to identified Westridge Crown lots and specified uses, and no written owner consent had been located for expansion. We did not accuse anyone of fraud. Facts first. The title company responded the next day, and that was when a new name entered the story. Adrian Page Galloway, a senior commercial title officer assigned to review the access issue before the closing moved forward. Adrian did not call me to say I was right, and she did not call Sloan wrong. She opened an underwriting review and requested documents from everybody. That was exactly what I wanted. Sloan reacted differently. She sent another message to residents saying I was attempting to reinterpret a community right that had existed for decades, and she repeated that the association was protecting established access. Harold forwarded the message to me with one sentence of his own. "This is not what you told us." I called him and said, "Because I am not challenging your access." The distinction was finally starting to spread. Julia then sent preservation requests covering communications about Juniper Road, the Ralston parcel, the access contribution, and the certification provided for the development. Several days later, documents began coming back through council, and one email stopped both of us. It had been sent to Sloan before she signed anything for Camden, and it came from the Homeowners Association's own attorney. The attorney warned that the existing easement appeared limited to the platted Westridge lots, and that extending access to the Ralston parcel would likely require Holloway's consent. Sloan had received the warning. Her reply was short. If the access issue was treated as unresolved, the developer might walk away. Julia printed the exchange and placed it beside the 1991 easement. Suddenly, the argument was no longer just about two people reading an old document differently. Sloan had been warned about the exact problem we had found, and she kept going. The next email was even more important because Camden himself asked whether the Homeowners Association could certify permanent access strongly enough for the title company to ensure it. Association counsel advised Sloan not to describe the road rights as unrestricted. She signed a certification anyway. Julia opened the attachment on her laptop and turned the screen toward me, and across the middle of the document were three words that went far beyond anything Dad had recorded in 1991. Perpetual, unrestricted, transferable. I stared at them, then at the attorney's warning sitting beside me. Julia did not celebrate. Neither did I. We had just reached a much more serious question, not whether Sloan had misunderstood the easement, but what she knew when she told a $28 million transaction that the road rights were unrestricted. Julia and I spent the next 2 days building a timeline, because one thing I learned in county work was that a pile of documents is not evidence until you understand what happened first, what happened next, and who knew what at each step. We laid out the 1991 easement, the subdivision plats, my certified objection, the association attorney's letters, the Westridge Vista marketing material, and Sloan's access rights certification across Julia's conference table. Every document answered one question and created another. The order mattered. The recorded easement came first, and its language was plain enough once we stopped looking at the phrase Sloan liked to quote and read the entire grant with its legal description. Lots 1 through 86 had access, emergency services had access, utility maintenance had access, and nothing we found added Camden Ralston's 42-acre parcel to that list. No amendment changed it. Julia drew 3 simple headings on a yellow legal pad. Who gets access, where the access applies, and what the access may be used for. She said people often hear the word easement and assume it means a broad right to use somebody else's property, when the real answer depends on the document that created that easement. I had spent years making the same point at the county, usually with less expensive land involved. Words set boundaries. Then we turned to the certification Sloan had signed, and the difference was hard to miss even without legal training. The recorded instrument described specific lots and limits, while her certification described the road access as perpetual, unrestricted, and transferable for the development transaction. Julia placed the 2 pages side by side and said, "A title officer is going to ask the same question we are asking." I knew exactly which one. Where did the extra rights come from? Adrian Page Galloway began requesting her own records through the title company's underwriting review, including the full easement, current surveys, the Ralston parcel description, any amendments, and any written consent from me. She did not accept my interpretation just because I owned the road, and she did not accept Sloan's interpretation just because the association had used it for 30 years. Her job was to determine what access could actually be supported before a title policy was issued around a $28 million transaction. That was reassuring. Sloan, meanwhile, kept telling residents that the dispute was a technical disagreement over old language, but the emails coming through council were making that explanation harder to believe. One message showed the association attorney warning her that the existing easement appeared tied to the platted Westridge Crown lots, and that serving land beyond those boundaries would likely require my written consent. Another showed Sloan answering that treating access as unresolved could cause Camden to abandon the project. She understood the risk. Julia was careful with what that meant, and I appreciated that because I did not want a story built around accusations we could not prove. This tells us she was warned, she said. It does not tell us why she made every decision after that, so we stay with what the documents show. That was the right approach. Facts before motives. We also checked whether Juniper Lake Road had ever been dedicated to the county or accepted into a public road system, because that could have changed the picture completely. The county records showed no such dedication, and maintenance records still traced back to Holloway Point rather than public road maintenance. My ownership was not the mystery. The scope of everyone else's rights was. By Friday, Adrian had enough questions that the title company placed the access portion of its review on hold while underwriting examined the conflict. That did not kill Camden's project, cancel his purchase agreement, or magically hand me a victory, but it meant the transaction could no longer treat Juniper Road access as an unquestioned fact. Someone had to resolve it. Julia explained that this was why property disputes are often won or lost long before anybody stands in a courtroom, because lenders, surveyors, title companies, permitting offices, and insurers all have their own jobs to do, and each one depends on documents being accurate. You do not always need the loudest argument. You need the right question in front of the right person. Then another group of preserved emails arrived, and Julia called me back to her office before lunch. Camden had asked the association directly whether its rights were strong enough for the title company to ensure permanent access to Westridge Vista, and the association attorney had advised Sloan not to use the word unrestricted because the recorded easement did not clearly support that claim. Sloan had received that advice before signing her certification. She signed anyway. I sat quietly while Julia arranged the attorney warning, Sloan's certification, and my earlier written objection in date order. 3 documents, 3 dates, 1 uncomfortable sequence. Then Julia opened the financial correspondence attached to the same production, and we found something neither of us had been looking for. The $1.6 million contribution Sloan had presented to residents as the foundation for lower dues and clubhouse improvements was not guaranteed money sitting in an account. It was payable only if Camden's transaction actually closed. Yet the association had already placed that expected money into its projected budget and approved planning for clubhouse upgrades around it. The road was supporting more than traffic now. It was supporting promises. I looked at Julia and asked the simplest question I could think of. If the closing depends on insured access, and the contribution depends on the closing, what happens if Adrian cannot ensure the access? Julia closed the budget file. Then a lot of people are going to start asking Sloan where her certainty came from. Her computer chimed before I could answer. One more email had arrived. Julia read it once, stopped, then turned the screen toward me. Sloan had written 6 words that changed the temperature in the room. Close first. Holloway can sue later. For a few seconds, neither Julia nor I said anything, because that sentence was more useful if we did not decorate it with assumptions. The email had been sent during a discussion about the access problem, after counsel had already warned Sloan that the old easement might not cover Camden Ralston's 42-acre parcel. Julia printed the message, wrote the date at the top of our timeline, and placed it between the attorney warning and Sloan's access rights certification. The sequence was getting harder to explain away. Julia still refused to call it fraud, and I agreed with her, because that was not our decision to make. What we could prove was simpler. Sloan had been warned about the limit. She knew the closing depended on reliable access, and she signed a certification using stronger language anyway. Then she wanted the deal closed before I could challenge it. Those were facts. The financial records added another layer, because the $1.6 million contribution was due only after Camden completed the purchase, yet the association had already treated that future payment like dependable money. Planning documents showed clubhouse upgrades moving forward, and budget projections presented the contribution as part of the association's expected financial picture. Residents had been encouraged to think the deal would lower their burden. The money was not there yet. I thought about Harold and Marjorie, and about all the other homeowners who had been told I was the stubborn landowner standing between them and a better clubhouse. Most of them had never seen the original easement, the attorney warning, or the condition attached to the developer's payment. They were making judgments with half the information. I knew the feeling. Julia asked whether I wanted to release the emails to the residents. And for a moment, I understood the temptation because one message could have changed the entire neighborhood conversation overnight. But dumping legal correspondence into a community argument would turn the dispute into gossip before the professionals responsible for the transaction finished reviewing the facts. I shook my head. Send it where it matters. That became our strategy. Julia forwarded the relevant documents through the proper channels to Adrian, the project lender's counsel, and the parties already involved in the transaction, making clear that we were not claiming authority to decide their underwriting or lending decisions. We simply wanted the recorded easement, the certification, my objection, and the association counsel's warning reviewed together. Then we waited. Waiting is work too. During that week, I kept Juniper Road open to the 86 homes, waved to neighbors as usual, and documented any project vehicle that entered without permission. I did not install a new gate, post angry signs, or park equipment across the road, because doing any of those things would have mixed my legitimate objection with interference against people who had legitimate rights. Dad had given those families access. I intended to honor it. Camden's team, meanwhile, seemed determined to keep the project moving while the access issue was under review. I saw updated promotional material online, heard that the purchase closing was still scheduled for Friday afternoon, and learned from Julia that the lender was waiting for the title company's final position on permanent access. The project was not dead. It was approaching a decision point. On Wednesday, Sloan sent residents another email saying Westridge Vista remained on schedule and describing the road dispute as a last-minute challenge that the association expected to resolve. Harold forwarded it to me without comment this time. I read it, closed my laptop, and drove Juniper Road at sunset. Hannah and I used to stop at the Overlook when problems at work followed me home, and she had a habit of waiting until I finished complaining before asking one question. What part can you actually control? I could almost hear her asking it again. Not Sloan. I could not control what Sloan told people, what Camden wanted to build, what residents believed, or whether the lender liked the economics of the deal. I could control whether my documents were accurate, whether my objections were clear, and whether I respected everyone else's lawful rights while defending mine. That was enough. Thursday morning, Adrian requested one final set of materials: the certified county copy of the 1991 easement, the attached exhibit, the current parcel map, and any document showing my written consent to expand access. Julia answered that no such consent existed and asked whether the title company needed a sworn statement from me. Adrian said she would let us know. Then came Friday. Around 9 that morning, Julia called while I was checking a drainage grate near the south end of the road. The closing is still scheduled for this afternoon, she said. I leaned against the pickup and looked across the lake. So they are going ahead. They are trying to. Her voice had changed. Julia told me Adrian had asked that the original recorded instrument be brought to the closing conference, not merely another scanned copy. I asked whether she needed anything else from us. She wants you there. That surprised me. Julia said the bank counsel, Camden, Sloan, association counsel, and title representatives were expected in the room, and the access issue would have to be addressed before funding could move forward. I looked down Juniper Road, quiet again after weeks of trucks, flags, promises, and paperwork. For more than 30 years, that road had carried people home without anybody needing to think about the words recorded beneath it. Now a $28 million transaction was waiting on those words. At 1:30 that afternoon, I put Dad's original folder into my truck and drove toward Julia's office. She was waiting outside with her leather case when I arrived, and before getting in she asked one last question. Ready? I looked at the folder between us. I have been ready since they stopped reading at ingress and egress. The closing room was on the 4th floor of a commercial title office, with a long walnut table, a wall-mounted screen, and a tray holding an unopened bottle of champagne beside clean glasses. Camden Brooks Ralston sat with his bank counsel near one end, while Sloan sat across from them in the same cream blazer she wore whenever she wanted a room to feel like the decision had already been made. Adrian Page Galloway was at the head of the table with the title commitment, survey, and underwriting file arranged in front of her. Nobody touched the champagne. Julia and I took the 2 open chairs nearest Adrian, and I placed Dad's folder on the table without opening it. Sloan looked at it, then at me, and gave me a small smile that seemed designed to say this was all unnecessary. Camden did not smile at anybody. He wanted to close. Adrian began by saying the title company had one unresolved issue involving permanent legal access to the 42-acre development parcel. She made clear that she was not deciding who was a good neighbor, who had behaved fairly, or whether the condo project should be built. Her question was narrower. Could the title company support the access being represented in the transaction? That was it. Adrian asked Julia for the certified copy of the 1991 easement, then asked me whether the original in Dad's folder matched it. I opened the folder, slid the recorded instrument toward her, and watched her compare the recording information page by page. She then placed Sloane's access rights certification beside it. Two documents sat 6 inches apart. Adrian read the important language from Sloane's certification first: permanent access, unrestricted use, transferable rights for the development parcel. Then she turned to the recorded easement and identified the properties it actually served. Lots 1 through 86 of Westridge Crown Phase 1 and Phase 2, together with emergency services and utility maintenance connected to those properties. Camden leaned forward. Sloane stayed still. Adrian moved to the clause we had found at the records office, the one stating that the easement could not be expanded to serve additional parcels acquired or developed outside the described subdivision boundaries without written consent from the owner of the burdened property. Then she placed the current parcel map on the table and pointed to Camden's 42 acres beyond those boundaries. "Mr. Holloway," she said, "did you sign written consent extending this easement to this parcel?" No, one word was enough. Adrian asked whether I had signed an amendment, supplemental easement, access agreement, or other recorded instrument granting the development use of Juniper Lake Road. I told her I had not, and Julia confirmed that our county records search had found no such document. Adrian turned toward the association attorney and asked whether the homeowners association had produced anything different. He looked down at his file. Not a recorded amendment. The room changed. Sloane leaned forward and said residents had continuously used Juniper Road for more than 30 years, which was true, and that the easement expressly allowed ingress and egress. Adrian nodded and said the title company was not disputing the rights granted to the existing 86 lots. Then she pointed again to Camden's parcel. "Those rights are not the question." Sloane tried the word she had used at the town hall. "Successors." Julia opened the recorded exhibit and calmly explained that a successor could succeed to a granted right, but the word did not erase the legal description or automatically add outside land to the original grant. Adrian looked at the exhibit, then at the parcel map. The boundary did not move. Julia next handed over the email from the association attorney warning Sloane that the easement appeared limited to the platted Westridge lots and that expanding it to the Ralston parcel would likely require my consent. Camden read the email silently after his counsel passed it to him. Then Julia produced the later message in which counsel advised Sloane not to describe the access as unrestricted. Sloane's certification used that exact word anyway. Camden finally looked directly at her. "Did you know about this before you certified the access?" Sloane answered that counsel had raised a possible interpretation issue and that she believed decades of use supported the association's position. Julia did not argue with her. She placed the final email on the table. "Close first. Holloway can sue later." Silence did the rest. Camden read the sentence, passed it to bank counsel, and asked Sloane whether she had written it. She said yes, but started explaining that it referred to keeping the transaction moving while legal questions were resolved. Adrian brought the discussion back to the only issue she had to decide. "This is not about whether someone may make an argument later," she said. "I have to determine what access I can ensure today." That landed. Bank counsel asked for a short recess, and when everyone returned, he said the lender could not release funds under the current structure without ensured permanent access adequate for the project. Adrian stated that the title policy could not be issued as proposed based on the documents before her, so the closing would be frozen until the access problem was resolved or the transaction was restructured. Nobody lost $28 million in that room, and I did not suddenly own Camden's project. The deal simply could not close on a road right that the recorded documents did not support. That was enough. Camden turned to Sloane and asked quietly, "You sold us access you could not document." She started to say it was subject to interpretation. Adrian closed the underwriting file. Not for title insurance. The champagne stayed unopened. The closing did not disappear, and neither did Westridge Vista, but everything changed once Camden and his lender stopped treating Juniper Lake Road as guaranteed access. Ralston Urban Partners paused the road-related work and began studying a second entrance from the county highway, a route that would require new engineering, permits, drainage work, and a much larger construction budget. Camden also turned his attention toward the promises his company had received from Westridge Crown. The problem had moved upstream. Within days, the association's insurance carrier opened a review of the access rights certification, while the board called a special meeting to explain why the $1.6 million contribution was no longer expected on schedule. Residents learned that the money had never been sitting in an account waiting for them, because payment depended on a closing that depended on access the title company could not ensure as presented. Plans for the clubhouse upgrades were put on hold. Reality arrived quietly. Harold Mercer called me after that meeting and apologized for believing I was trying to take something away from the neighborhood. I told him there was nothing to apologize for, because he had made decisions based on what his board had told him, and most people do not spend their evenings reading recorded easements for entertainment. Then he asked the question I had been waiting to hear from somebody in Westridge Crown. Our access is still good, right? Yes. That mattered most. The 86 homeowners still had exactly what Vernon Holloway had granted them in 1991, and I had no interest in shrinking their rights just because Sloan had tried to stretch them. Emergency services still came through, utility crews still performed lawful maintenance, and residents still drove Juniper Road to their homes every day. I kept waving. Over the next several weeks, the Westridge Crown Board suspended Sloan as president while it reviewed the correspondence, the certification, and the spending decisions tied to the expected developer payment. After a contentious membership meeting, she was removed from the position, and the association formally rescinded the certification that had described Juniper Road access as unrestricted and transferable. The board also stopped presenting the condo parcel as part of the existing easement. The paper trail had caught up. Camden never asked me to kill his project, and I never demanded that he abandon it, because the 42 acres belonged to someone else, and I had no right to control lawful development there. His company explored a redesigned entrance from the county road and began working through the cost and permitting questions that came with it. If he could build legal access without using my property, that was his business. Fair is fair. The crews that had entered Juniper Road before the dispute was resolved repaired the damaged shoulder and replaced vegetation disturbed during the early survey work. Julia also helped prepare a recorded clarification tied to the existing property records so future boards would have a harder time confusing access for the original 86 lots with access for land outside the subdivision. It did not create new rights or erase old ones. It made the existing boundaries harder to ignore. Clear paper prevents cloudy memories. Near the end of summer, I drove into town and noticed the Westridge Vista billboard was still standing beside the county highway. The polished buildings were still there in the rendering, along with the lake, terraces, and landscape paths, but one line had been removed from the bottom. Private gated lake road access was gone. I smiled and kept driving. That evening, I took the pickup down Juniper Road just before sunset, the same way Hannah and I had done more times than I could count. A couple from Westridge Crown passed me going home and lifted their hands from the dashboard in a friendly wave, and I returned it without thinking. The road sounded like it always had beneath my tires. Gravel, nothing more. At the overlook, I parked facing Lake Westridge and sat for a while as the last light moved across the water. I thought about Dad rebuilding those culverts in 1987, then sitting at a table 4 years later and making sure neighboring families had a dependable way home without giving away more than he intended. I thought about Hannah asking me, whenever work made me angry, what part of the problem I could actually control. They had both been right in different ways. Know what you are giving and control what you can. What stayed with me most was that nobody needed to be ruined for the problem to be corrected. The homeowners kept their lawful access. I kept control of the road my family owned, and Camden remained free to pursue his project through an entrance he could actually document. Sloan lost her position because the board and the people involved in the transaction had documents they could examine for themselves. That was enough. Stories like this are dramatized because real property disputes usually unfold through folders, emails, surveys, meetings, and long stretches where nothing looks dramatic at all, but the lesson underneath is very real to me. Keep your deeds, read the entire easement, save your receipts and notices, and never assume an official-sounding person has more authority than the document actually gives them. If a dispute comes, anger may feel faster, but evidence travels farther. And when somebody tries to turn a limited right into unlimited power, the strongest answer is often not a threat, a locked gate, or a shouting match. It is a clean record, a calm mind, and the patience to take the problem to the place where the paperwork has to tell the truth.